Imagine you're inside a cave. The ceiling is low, the walls are damp, and it's cool inside. The mouth of the cave overlooks the sea. But that sea isn't the sea we know today. The water is 40 meters below. What you see on the horizon isn't a shore, it's a dry valley. 4 rivers flow through that valley. It's green, teeming with game animals. A fire is burning. Beside it are seashells, a whale tooth, carved stones, traces of someone eating crispy bread, and marks someone drew on the wall with their finger. Human footprints, traces of modern humans. This fire burned 35,000 years ago. You're on the southwest coast of Iran. 200 kilometers south of here lies a valley submerged underwater. The place the Sumerians called Dilmun, the Bible called Eden, the Quran called Erim, and Plato called Atlantis. But 30,000 years before that valley was swallowed, someone was already living in this cave. The city on the sonar maps is a belated story. There were people much older than that.
Today, we will open the seal. In the end, you will have a single sentence left in your hand. The first modern humans ventured out to sea much earlier than we thought, and they were far less solitary than we imagined. On our previous journey, we descended beneath the Persian Gulf Valley, a valley where a civilization once lived, swallowed by the waves between 14,000 BC and 5,500 BC. The Sumerians wrote of this swallowed world as Dilmun, the Hebrews as Eden, the Arabs as Erim, and Plato as Atlantis. We left one question unanswered. If the people who fled north when the valley was swallowed were the Ubaidians, who used the valley before them? Because for millennia, that valley was a paradise. It was temperate, rich in water, and full of resources. During the Ice Age, the very time modern humans were leaving Africa, someone must have been there. Official history does not give a clear answer to this question because the evidence is scattered. Some is in the caves of Israel, some is beneath the Arabian desert, some is in the cliffs of the Iranian coast, some lies on now-defunct landmasses like Sundaland, Sahul, and Doggerland, and some is hidden in DNA, your DNA. Today, we will put these traces side by side. 7 seals, 1 story. When modern man left Africa, he headed toward the sea. The coast was his path. The valley was his stopover. And the descendants of those who managed to survive, including you, still carry the traces of those first seafarers today. Let's go to the southwestern coast of Iran, to the part of the Khuzestan province near the Strait of Hormuz. There is a small cave in the foothills of the mountains, about 80 kilometers northeast of the modern city. The locals call it Yafte, or Boof, the owl. It is a little-known excavation site in Iranian archaeology. In 2005, Iranian archaeologist Feridun Biglari and his team began working in this cave.
The inner layers of the cave were unlike anywhere else. At the bottom were ordinary Upper Paleolithic tools from the post-Mousterian to pre-Aurignacian transitional period, but these tools were made with a highly specialized technique, long, leaf-shaped stone blades with an average thickness of just 4 millimeters. The name of this technique is Baradostian. It appears in parts of Iran and Iraq around 35,000 to 20,000 BC. Around the same time, on the western side of the Gulf Valley, in the Levant, there was another technique, the Aurignacian. It was much better known and more heavily studied. The groundbreaking importance of Boof Cave was this. Baradostian tools were found on the eastern wall of the Gulf Valley, on the Iranian side, a place the academic world had never bothered to look. In the 7th layer of Boof Cave, dating back to around 33,000 BC, something else was found. Burnt seashells, open sea fish bones, specifically tuna, and a fragment of a whale tooth. The cave's current location is 400 meters above sea level and 70 kilometers inland from the present-day coast. But in 33,000 BC, global sea levels were 110 meters lower. This means the coastline back then was 70 kilometers further southeast, right in the middle of the Gulf Valley. The inhabitants of Boof Cave went to the open sea. They walked 70 kilometers, descended into the heart of the valley, fished, collected shells, and came back. This is astonishing behavior for any Upper Paleolithic human. In Europe's Aurignacian period, there are no whale teeth, no tuna bones, and no evidence of open-sea fishing. Modern European humans, Cro-Magnons, were land hunters. They tracked mammoths and wild horses. Meanwhile, modern humans on the Iranian coast were already seafarers.
During the same period, Barradosian techniques spread southward toward the Strait of Hormuz. The exact same tools were found in modern-day Oman, south of the strait. The tools from the Wadi Wataya cave, dating back to 31,000 BC, are identical. They are exactly the same. So between 33,000 and 31,000 BC, the people surrounding the Gulf Valley crossed from the northern coast to the southern coast, traversing the valley. We don't know what lay in the very center of that valley, but the people of Boof Cave went there, returned, and began producing the exact same tools on the opposite coast in Oman. This happened 30,000 years before the Ubaid people and 27,000 years before the Sumerians, long before the peoples we traditionally consider the owners of paradise. The findings of Boof Cave were published in 2010 in the Iranian Journal of Archaeology, but they received very little attention in the academic world. Because of politics, Iranian archaeology is semi-isolated, and international cooperation is limited. The data just sits in archives, mostly in the Tehran University Archaeology Museum. The question still awaits an answer. If the seafarer living in Boof Cave in 33,000 BC was a modern human, where did he come from? Who was his ancestor? Let's go further back. Jebel Faya is a small rocky hill in the middle of the desert in the interior of the Emirate of Sharjah, UAE. Today, it is an arid region of scattered palm trees, dry valleys, and red soil. In 2003, German archaeologist Hans-Peter Urpmann and his wife Margarete began excavating here. They dug for years. In 2011, they dropped a bombshell in Science magazine. In the layers beneath the Jebel Faya rock, they found some of the oldest known stone tools made by modern humans outside of Africa. The date? 125,000 BC. According to paleoclimatic data, the Arabian Peninsula was not a desert at that time. Between approximately 130,000 BC and 75,000 BC, the world experienced an interglacial period. The glaciers had retreated, and the global climate was actually slightly warmer than it is today. It rained heavily in Arabia. Seasonal lakes, lush grasslands, and vast savannas stretched across the peninsula. During this exact same period, modern humans, Homo sapiens, had the opportunity to spread from Africa into Arabia because the Sahara Desert was also green, a phenomenon known as the Green Sahara period. A land bridge allowed passage from the Sahara to Egypt, then to the Levant, and from there down into Arabia. The tools from Jebel Faya date precisely to this window. The production technique, the Levallois-Mousterian transition, is of African origin. This means the people who made these tools were modern humans who had migrated directly from Africa. This finding was revolutionary. Until 2011, the academic consensus was that the migration out of Africa happened around 60,000 to 50,000 BC in a single wave, moving through the Sinai Peninsula northward into Eurasia. Jebel Faya pushed this timeline back by 60,000 years and shifted the main migration route from the Levant to Arabia. Urpmann's hypothesis suggested that after modern humans left Africa around 130,000 BC, they used two main routes, one leading north into the Levant and the other crossing the southern Bab el-Mandeb Strait into Yemen, Oman, along the Arabian coast, and eventually toward the Indo-Pacific. The most important feature of this southern route was that it ran strictly along the coast, not out in the open sea, but right next to it. These hunters collected shellfish, fished, and sourced their drinking water from coastal freshwater springs. The Jebel Faya rock formation sat right in the middle of this coastal highway. Today it's a desert, but back then it was very close to the sea. Because sea levels were low, the ancient coastline actually stretched further out than it does today. While excavations continue on land, older traces are likely submerged beneath the sea along this coastal route, hidden under high water levels where access is currently impossible. The question remains, did the people of Jebel Faya just pass through this coastal route, or did they settle there? In other words, are all subsequent Eurasian peoples their descendants, or did this local population eventually fade away? The answer lies partly in DNA, but we'll come back to that. The Ertmann couple's science article remains controversial in mainstream academia. Some geneticists, particularly David Reich's group at Harvard and teams at Stanford, support the Arabian route, while others reject it. The debate is ongoing, but the stone tools are right there in the museum, securely dated to 125,000 BC. Modern humans arrived in Arabia 120,000 years before the Sumerians. Now, let's look at the northwestern wall of the Levant, the northwestern coast of present-day Israel. On the western slope of Mount Carmel lies a small cave overlooking the Mediterranean, Misliya. It is practically empty, receives few visitors, and most people have never even heard of it. In 2002, a team from Tel Aviv University began excavating the cave. In 2007, during their 5th season, they found a piece of a human upper jawbone containing 8 teeth. Using uranium-thorium dating on the tooth enamel, the results shocked the world. The jawbone was dated to 194,000 BC. This is the oldest modern human fossil ever found outside of Africa. It completely shattered the academic consensus. Before the Misliya findings were published in Nature in 2018, the oldest modern human remains outside Africa were thought to be from the School and Kafsa caves, also in Israel, dating to around 100,000 to 90,000 BC. Misliya pushed that back by a staggering 100,000 years. To put that in perspective, that is almost 20 times longer than the entire span of time between the building of the Egyptian pyramids and the world today. The Misliya find wasn't just a lone jawbone. The cave was filled with tools. These tools were of the early Mousterian type, using the level wa technique, which was being produced in Africa at the exact same time. This proved that these humans didn't evolve these techniques independently. They brought their tools with them from Africa. But the most unsettling detail about Misliya was that they weren't alone. Around the same time, between 200,000 and 190,000 BC, a modern human skull was found in the Opidima Cave in Greece, published in 2019, dated to around 210,000 BC. Furthermore, 47 modern human teeth were discovered in the Fuyuan Cave in Daoxian, China, published in 2015, with dates ranging from 120,000 to 80,000 BC. All of these discoveries were published after 2010, and each one shook the foundations of anthropology because they complicated the classic out-of-Africa hypothesis. The old model argued for a single wave around 60,000 BC. The new picture reveals multiple waves, starting as early as 200,000 BC. Not all of these migrations were failures, and not all disappeared. However, most of their descendants are statistically invisible in today's human population. Their lineages seemingly ended. Or did they? In recent years, geneticists have been using a fascinating concept: ghost populations. These are lost human groups whose bones we haven't physically found, but whose undeniable genetic signatures remain written in the DNA of living people. Misliya, Opidima, and Daoxian might just be the ones we've happened to find. The true ghost populations are those whose bones are still missing. Where is this all leading? You'll see in the 7th seal. The beachcomber hypothesis and the sunken continents. How did all these non-African modern humans spread from Misliya to Opidima and from Jebel Faya to Daoxian? Which route did they take? Over the last 20 years, the beachcomber hypothesis, also known as the coastal migration theory, has become a prominent framework in modern paleoanthropology. Its core premise is simple. After the first modern humans left Africa, they didn't spread across daunting mountains and harsh deserts. They followed the coastlines. They moved from the Bab el-Mandeb Strait along the Arabian coast, past the shores of Iran and Pakistan, down the coasts of India, Myanmar, Sumatra, and Java, all the way to Australia. Why the coast? For 3 vital reasons. Food. The coast offers protein-rich food year-round: shellfish, fish, seabird eggs, and seaweed. Inland hunting, by contrast, is highly seasonal and risky. Water. Fresh water sources are abundant along coastlines, where rivers and small streams empty into the sea. Navigation. The coastline acts as a natural GPS. Keep the sea on one side and follow the shore. You can easily get lost in the middle of a desert, but you won't get lost on a beach. The strongest evidence for the beachcomber hypothesis is indirect but profound: the timing of human arrival in Australia. Modern Australian Aboriginals reached the continent around 65,000 BC. This date is certain, confirmed by radiocarbon dating, optically stimulated luminescence, and mitochondrial DNA. The stone tools found at the Majid Bay rock shelter in northern Australia offer the most precise dating available. The massive problem this creates for traditional history is geographical. To reach Australia from Africa, humans had to travel at least 10,000 to 12,000 kilometers along coastlines. More importantly, even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age, reaching Australia required crossing at least 2 or 3 stretches of open ocean. Some islands in the Indian Ocean were never connected to the Asian mainland. There is a deep ocean channel between Bali and Lombok known as the Wallace Line, and it never closed during any ice age. Therefore, the people who reached Australia must have possessed open sea navigation skills as early as 65,000 BC, 60,000 years before the dawn of modern seafaring technology. How is this possible? The answer is that the populations spreading along this coastal route were already seasoned seafarers. Australia was no exception. They traveled to the Philippines, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands across open water, all between 50,000 and 40,000 BC. These people likely shared the same cultural and technological foundation as the inhabitants of Misliya Cave, the same coastal highway, the same maritime technology, and the same lifestyle tethered to the sea. But the vast majority of this evidence is now underwater. During the Ice Age, the coastlines were 110 to 120 meters below where they are today. Consequently, the ancient camps, fishing grounds, and burial sites of this coastal route are completely submerged. In 2002, the Indian National Institute of Oceanography conducted a survey off the southwest coast of Cambay and Goa. They found stone tools 30 meters deep, 6 kilometers offshore, dating to around 18,000 to 15,000 BC. In Indonesia, researchers are searching for even older traces beneath the Java Sea in what was once Sundaland. During the Ice Age, Sundaland was a dry, massive landmass. Today's Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and the Malay Peninsula were all part of a single continuous continent. As the ice melted and the waters rose, this entire coastal population was swallowed by the sea. The underwater coastal highway remains an endless archaeological dream. The evidence is down there, we just haven't been able to reach it yet. Let's zoom in on Southeast Asia, the archipelago we now know as Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. At the last glacial maximum, around 18,000 BC, the map looked entirely different. With sea levels 120 meters lower, the entire Java Sea and much of the South China Sea were dry land. Sundaland. Sundaland spanned approximately 1.5 million square kilometers, about half the size of modern India. Located directly on the equator, it was covered in lush rainforests and massive river systems. The eastern coast of this landmass faced another giant continent across the Wallace Line, Sahol, which combined Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania. Sahol was twice the size of modern Australia. Between Sundaland and Sahol lay a 90-kilometer stretch of open sea. On clear days, someone standing on the eastern coast of Sundaland could likely see the peaks of Sahol on the horizon. To cross, they needed boats, and modern humans made that crossing around 65,000 BC. While the primary coastal settlements of Sundaland are now deeply submerged, some ancient highland hills and mountain peaks remain above water today as islands. Research on these locations is highly revealing. Misliya Cave in northern Borneo, Sarawak, was excavated in 1958, revealing a human skull dating to 40,000 BC. Tabon Cave on Palawan Island in the Philippines was excavated in 1962, uncovering a human skull dating to 47,000 BC. Lida Cave in western Sumatra, first looked at in 1887 and re-evaluated in 2017, yielded modern human teeth dating between 73,000 and 63,000 BC. These sites represent the highlands of Sundaland. The original coastal fishing villages and the bulk of the population are now underwater. The rising waters accelerated rapidly around 12,000 BC, and by 11,000 BC, Borneo, Sumatra, and Java had become isolated islands. Sundaland ceased to exist. This swallowed landmass was incredibly vast and densely populated. Its equatorial rainforests and massive river estuaries provided abundant resources year-round. Sundaland was likely one of the most crowded human hubs of the Ice Age, and it is now entirely underwater. In 2015, claims emerged regarding pyramidal structures found on the seabed near Pulau Pinang, and some suggested that the controversial overland site of Gunung Padang might have underwater extensions. Mainstream academia largely sidelines these theories because underwater excavation is incredibly expensive, sediment contamination is high, and dating is notoriously difficult. It is the same story, the same academic silence, the same swallowed landmass. The survivors of Sundaland fled north into the mountains and island peaks. Their descendants are the indigenous peoples of Southeast Asia today, and they have carried the deep trauma of a cataclysmic flood in their cultural memories for millennia. If we look closely at the mythologies of indigenous Asian and Pacific peoples, the parallels are striking. China. In Han mythology, the universe begins with primordial chaos, out of which the giant Pangu emerges. He separates the sky from the earth, and upon his death, his body transforms into the world. His blood becomes rivers, and the parasites on his body become humans. However, among the Miao people of southern China, there is an alternative, vivid flood myth. They describe a great deluge that submerges the entire world. The only survivors are two siblings, a brother and sister, who escape by floating in a giant gourd. When the waters recede, they repopulate the earth. Japan. In Shinto mythology, Watatsumi, the dragon sea god, rules from a magnificent palace at the bottom of the ocean. The imperial lineage itself traces its origins to a convergence of the sky and the sea. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, sends her grandson Ninigi to rule the islands, but Ninigi marries the daughter of the sea god Watatsumi. The Philippines. The myths of the Visayan people describe a massive flood where the waters rose so high that people had to flee to the mountain peaks. One of the sole survivors was rescued by a mysterious man emerging directly from the sea. Australia. In northern Australia, ancient rock paintings depict the Wandjina, striking, mouthless figures with massive eyes and halo-like rings around their heads. In Aboriginal tradition, the Wandjina are rain and cloud spirits, but among the Wara and Woonambal peoples, they are explicitly described as creator beings who came from the sea before bringing rain and law to the land. New Guinea. In the Trobriand Islands of the Milne Bay region, traditional beliefs speak of an underworld called Tuma. Tuma lies beneath the sea. It is the sacred place where the ancestors originally came from, and it is where the dead return. The common theme across the entire Pacific Rim is undeniable. Indigenous cultures overwhelmingly trace their ultimate origins to entities or ancestors who arrived from the sea, accompanied by a foundational myth of a world-altering flood. The standard anthropological explanation is that these myths developed independently as a response to local tropical storms and regional flooding, or that deifying natural disasters is simply a universal human trait. But the drowning of Sundaland occurred between 12,000 BC and 7,000 BC. These myths are highly likely to be oral histories passed down from generation to generation, preserving the memories of actual geographical displacement. The Pangu myth in China was first committed to writing around the 3rd century BC, nearly 9,000 years after the water stabilized, yet it clearly stems from an immensely older oral tradition. The exact same 9,000-year gap applies to the Sumerian, Babylonian, Hebrew, and Greek flood myths. The story of the Great Flood is found in every corner of the globe. The survivors carried the traumatic memory of their swallowed coastal civilizations up into the mountains and inland plains, and eventually into the written word. Which swallowed worlds were they remembering?
Sundaland for Asia, the Sahul Coast for Australia, the Persian Gulf Valley for the Middle East, Doggerland for Europe. Each region experienced its own massive loss of land to the rising seas. Each generated its own flood myth. It was not a coincidence. Now we open the final, most unsettling seal. All of these pieces, Buff Cave, Jebel Thea, Misliya, the Beachcomber hypothesis, Sundaland, and the Pacific flood myths, are fragments of a much larger picture regarding modern humanity's exodus from Africa. But a critical piece is still missing. Our exodus was not a lonely one. When the first modern humans arrived in Eurasia, other human species were already there, waiting for them. We already know about the Neanderthals. They lived in Europe and Western Asia and officially disappeared around 40,000 BC. We know they interbred with modern humans because roughly 2% of the DNA of every non-African person alive today is Neanderthal. But they weren't the only ones. In 2008, a tiny fragment of a finger bone was found in the Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. DNA sequencing conducted at Svante Pääbo's laboratory at the Max Planck Institute revealed a bombshell. This was a completely unknown human species, neither Neanderthal nor Homo sapiens. They called them the Denisovans. Remarkably, Denisovan DNA is heavily present in specific living populations today. Melanesians, Australian Aboriginals, Papuans, and certain indigenous groups in the Philippines carry up to 4% to 6% Denisovan DNA. Think about the geographical implications of this. The physical bones of the Denisovans were found in the freezing interior of Siberia, yet their genetic legacy is concentrated in the tropical Pacific. This means that as modern humans migrated toward the Pacific, they encountered this alternative human species along their coastal routes, interbred with them, and carried this genetic mixture all the way to Australia. But the Denisovan story gets even stranger. In 2018, researchers realized that Denisovan DNA actually consists of two completely separate genetic lineages. One group belongs to the individuals found in the Siberian cave. The second group must have lived somewhere entirely different, possessing a distinct genetic profile. The estimated geography for this second group is Southeast Asia, or Sundaland. We have two distinct lineages, one we have the bones for and one we don't. The latter is a ghost population, a ghost that haunts the genome of modern Pacific Islanders. And the genetic mysteries keep compounding. In 2020, David Reich's group at Harvard analyzed the DNA of West African populations and discovered that before modern humans even left Africa, they interbred with an entirely unknown archaic hominin population. This mystery group is estimated to have split from the modern human lineage roughly 500,000 to 1 million years ago. Their bones have never been found. This is Ghost Population Gen 2. At the end of the exact same year, another research group identified a third ghost population hidden within the DNA of East Asian populations, yet unidentified, yet unnamed. We have long viewed modern humans as a solitary species because all the others vanished, leaving us alone in the historical record. But DNA doesn't lie. Looking back, the last 200,000 years of human history were not a solo performance. Multiple human species lived side by side in parallel worlds. We crossed paths, we interacted, and we interbred. Most of them eventually faded into extinction, but parts of them survived inside us. Let us look at the chain of events. 194,000 BC, the Misliya jawbone. Modern humans arrive in the Levant. 210,000 BC, the Epidema skull. Modern humans reach Greece. 125,000 BC, Jebel Thea tools. Modern humans settle in Green Arabia.
33,000 BC, Boof Cave. Modern human seafarers fish the Iranian coast. 12,000 to 7,000 BC, Sunderland is swallowed. Survivors scatter into Asia. 14,000 to 5,500 BC, the Gulf Valley is swallowed. Survivors flee into the Middle East. 5,500 BC, the Ubaidians, the last people to abandon the dry floor of the Gulf. 4,000 BC, the Sumerians, the cultural descendants of the Ubaidians. At every single link in this historical chain, humanity was sharing the earth with someone else. Sometimes it was a Neanderthal, sometimes a Denisovan, and sometimes a ghost population whose physical remains continue to elude us. Your very DNA contains the structural echoes of at least 2, 3, or perhaps 4 lost human species. One of them exists only as a statistical fragment in your genetic code.
Modern humans did not just march out of Africa in a vacuum. We took a piece of every land we passed through, and we inherited a genetic legacy from every population we mingled with. Our ancestors, whom we long thought were completely unique and alone, were actually walking alongside other versions of humanity for millennia. The 7 seals reveal a single, cohesive narrative. When modern humans left Africa, they headed toward the sea much earlier than we thought, as early as 200,000 BC. They utilized the coastal highways. They crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They spread across a lush green Arabia. They moved into the Levant, Anatolia, and Europe, where they met and mingled with the Neanderthals. They traced the coastlines of Iran, Pakistan, and India. They reached the massive continent of Sunderland, where they encountered and interbred with the southern branch of the Denisovans. They crossed the deep ocean channels into Australia. Later, as the ice sheets melted and Sunderland was swallowed by the ocean, they fled into the highlands of Asia. As the Persian Gulf Valley was submerged, they retreated to the Mesopotamian plains to become the Ubaidians, and eventually the Sumerians. At every stage of the journey, they mixed with others, peoples whose bones we have found, peoples whose bones remain lost, and peoples who exist only as genetic shadows. Official history tells this story with extreme caution, revealing it in 1,000 tiny, disjointed pieces. This hesitation exists because every new discovery, be it Jebel Faya, Misliya, Apodema, or Denisova, completely shatters the established paradigm.
The first modern humans were seafarers. They left early, and they were absolutely not alone. We are the direct descendants of the people who navigated the open waters of Boof Cave, the people who made the perilous ocean crossings to Australia in 65,000 BC, and the refugees who survived the drowning of Sunderland and the Gulf Valley. The traditional coordinates of paradise, whether called Dilmun, Eden, Irem, or Atlantis, are a later attempt to map a much older story. Our ancestors had been utilizing those exact geographies since 200,000 BC. The world was not swallowed just once. It was swallowed in pieces over and over again. Sunderland, the Sahul Coast, Doggerland, the Persian Gulf Valley, the Indian Ocean Shelf, and the Bering Land Bridge, these were all ecological paradises, and they were all eventually claimed by the sea. The traumatic memories of those who survived these inundations cascaded down through thousands of years of oral tradition, finally reaching us as universal flood myths, legends of lost continents, and tales of gods arriving from the sea. Paradise was not a single specific location. Paradise was many places, and they all shared one defining fate. Today, they lie deep underwater, while the blood of the people who built them still flows within our DNA.
This leaves us with one final haunting question. If modern humans have been thriving outside of Africa since 200,000 BC, with Misliya at 194,000 BC and Apodema at 210,000 BC, when did they actually leave Africa? And if the first waves left that long ago, who was left behind in Africa? Who was there before us? Because inside Africa, there are older traces, much older. Hominin remains stretching back 300,000, 400,000, and 500,000 years.
and many of these fossils do not anatomically fit into the modern human category. They are the others. On our next journey, we are heading deep into the heart of Africa. We will look closely at the archaic populations that contributed to the creation of modern humans: Homo heidelbergensis, Homo naledi, Homo bodoensis, and that elusive third ghost population whose existence is still known only through the silent testimony of our DNA. The first modern human was not a brand new beginning, it was a complex continuation. Which of the discoveries we discussed today surprised or unsettled you the most? Let me know in the comments below. Which ghost population resonates with you the most? The maritime Denisovans of Southeast Asia, Africa's deeply ancient mystery ancestor, or East Asia's unnamed third lineage?
If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and don't miss our next journey. The cliffs of Iran are still standing. Booth Cave is still there. Sunderland still sleeps beneath the Java Sea. And right now, inside your very DNA, lies the genetic signature of someone whose name has been entirely forgotten by history. Until next time.